So we first start with a dour performance at Marvel Stadium. It's the only way to really put it. But the one thing the Hawthorn had to do was get back on the winners list today, which they did. Hawthorn 124, West Coast 74. Now, unfortunately, there was a couple of injury concerns, both on Hawthorn's point of view and both concussions, with Carl Amon and Jack Scrimshaw both coming off throughout the game with HIAs, and both did fail, so both of them will be missing next week. Now, both teams find it tough to score in the first 10 minutes of the contest, but once the Hawks broke through, they looked dangerous. However, kicking at goal was absolutely woeful from the brown and gold. 2 goals, 8 to quarter time simply wasn't good enough, but they did hold a 7-point lead heading into quarter time. However, heading into the second term, this is when the Hawks put the pedal to the metal. Their pressure started to rise and it went onto the scoreboard. After 7 goals throughout the second quarter, the Hawks led comfortably by 35 points. Now, credit to the Eagles, they were able to not let this margin blow out in the third term, and the West Coast were able to even it up in the territory battle and at clearance. They had the quarter won with a minute to go in the third quarter, but a late Hawks goal saw them push the margin out to 37 points in the final term. And the spectacle of this game is well and truly gone in the final quarter. West Coast did pretty well to stay in touch with Hawthorn and almost win the final quarter. However, they did let 3 late goals slip past them, and in the end they did lose by 50 points, the Eagles. Now, to be honest, I don't think you really take much away from this for the Hawks. I mean, they beat up on a team that they really should have won. If anything, they probably should have put on another 30 or 40 points. Their kicking at goal was pretty poor today, Hawthorn, but they chalk up a win on the board. They get back on the winners list, so that's all they can really ask for them. And West Coast, yet another disappointing performance, and I mean, it's going to be hard to see where they're going to find a win this year. So moving to the statistics of this game, on Hawthorn with the multiple goal kickers, Jack Gunston with 4, Chol with 3, and McDonald and Ginnivan with 2. On the Eagles, 3 goals to Liam Ryan, 2 goals to Harley Reid and Jake Waterman. On the disposals, we had Hawthorn Battle with 29, Hustwaite and Warple with the 24, Sicily and Ward with the 23, and for West Coast, Marrick with 25, Baker 24, Hoff 23, and 19 to Reid and Hutchinson. And then finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Lloyd Meek top scored for the game with the 130, 114 to Chol, 107 to Battle, 102 to Ginnivan, and 92 to Gunston. And for the Eagles, 95 to Flynn, 86 to Hutchinson, 81 to Hoff, 77 to Baker, and 74 to Marrick. But before we go any further, we have to quickly reveal the nomination for the round 6 members vote. How the members vote works for you guys. For the review in 2025, a 3-2-1 voting system is awarded for every single game of the AFL season on the channel. And each round, players who receive 3 votes in the game have a chance to get a bonus vote. I will decide the 4 best players from the round, who will enter a poll exclusive for channel members to vote on, and the winner of that poll will receive the bonus vote for the round, the members vote. And at the end of the 2025 AFL season, every vote counts. So this is your chance to have your say on the 3rd ever Boundary Riders medalist. So if that appeals to you, or if you just want to show some extra support on the channel, then make sure to click the channel membership link down below and join in the fun. But for now, let's get back into the video. So the members vote for round 6 goes to Bulldogs captain Marcus Bontempelli. So let's get to the votes for the Hawks v West Coast game. 3 votes went to Lloyd Meek, 2 votes to Jack Gunston, and the 1 vote to John Newcomb. So on Sunday afternoon, we had the game of the round. We were set up for an absolute treat at the MCG. Carlton up against Geelong. Carlton off a couple of wins. Geelong obviously being one of the form teams in the competition. And it was Carlton who caused a pretty big upset in the end, holding on to the lead after the second term and winning in the end by 18 points. Carlton 94, Cats 76. Now, there was one injury concern from this game, which was Zach Williams. Unfortunately, another soft tissue injury. It does seem he was subbed out in this game with a calf, so probably misses another couple of weeks, which is unfortunate for the Blues. But getting to the game itself, it was a bit of an up and down sort of game in the first term, and it was also a goal for goal sort of contest. But with the Blues winning the clearance battle and 2 late goals, they held a 7-point advantage in the latter stages of the opening term. But a goal on the siren for the Cats saw the margin reduced to just 1 point at quarter time. But that clearance work that I mentioned a little earlier did the Blues wonders in the second quarter, as they piled on 4 in a row to give themselves a handy break. Now, the Cats finished with 2 of the last 3 goals to stay somewhat in touch at halftime, but the Blues still led by 19 points. But that momentum the Cats accumulated in the late parts of the second term came into their third quarter, as they kicked 2 goals from their first 3 inside 50s. And many would have been forgiven in thinking that the Cats were just going to start to take over. But the Blues held strong. They kicked 3 goals in response to push the margin to a game-high 28 points, which was the 3-quarter time margin for the Blues. Now, Geelong started well in the final quarter with 2 quick goals in quick succession to send a shudder through the Blues, and their 3rd goal in a row set up for an amazing finish at the MCG. However, the Blues were able to hold strong in the last term, courtesy of a George Hewitt winner, and in the end, they were able to hold on by 18 points, the Blues. Well done from Carlton today. They've got a couple of soft wins over the last couple of weeks. This is their first real test to see if they can compete, and they did today. So great performance from pretty much their whole 23. And the Blues now can get their season up and going after a very poor start. And Geelong, they've been a little bit iffy so far this year. They have been slow starters in years gone by, so I wouldn't be putting too many concerns on the Cats just yet. But a couple of players in pretty down form at the moment, and they need to start finding some consistency going into the rest of the year. But I'm pretty sure they'll be okay. Moving to the multiple goal kickers of this game. First of all, with the Blues, Curnow and Mackay with the 3, Fogarty with the 2, and for Geelong, Cameron with 4, Dempsey with 2. On the disposal front for the Carlton, Walsh with 30, Hewitt with 29 along with Paddy Cripps, 25 to Chera and Hollands, and for Geelong, Bailey Smith 29, Manna 25, 21 to Humphreys and Guthrie, and 20 to Holmes. And finally on the AFL fantasy scoring, Patrick Cripps top scored with the 131, 117 to De Koning and Mackay, 114 to Hewitt and 104 to Ollie Hollands. And for the Cats, 132 Bailey Smith, 115 Manna, 100 to Atkins, 92 to Cameron, and 87 to Humphreys. But getting to the votes in this one, 3 votes Patrick Cripps, 2 votes Harry Mackay, 1 vote Nick Haynes. Well, pretty much all 3 of these players had their best performances of the year for Carlton. Patrick Cripps led from the front. I don't know if he's going to be polling 45 votes this year, but he did himself no ill will in this game today. Led from the front with the 29 touches, 9 tackles, 7 marks. He did more than enough to get his team over the line in the end. Harry Mackay didn't do a great deal in the first half, but when he came into it in the second half, he was arguably the match winner. Took 5 contested marks in the end, finished with 3 goals, so great to see him back in some good form. And Nick Haynes, best performance by far for the Blues. Had some shaky errors in the first couple of weeks of the season. He was a bit of the whipping boy at Carlton, but his best performance by far today. Intercept marks for fun, intercept possessions for fun. Great defensive effort from Nick Haynes. So now we move to the first game on Sunday, up in the Gold Coast, pretty warm conditions. And even though the Suns went into this one as favourites, it was seen as a bit of a danger game, and especially after the Swans got off to a hot start. But it was all the Gold Coast after the second quarter, and in the end, the Gold Coast Suns ran out comfortable winners by 38 points. Gold Coast 117, Sydney 79. So to the injury concerns from this game, and it was Ben Patton, who seemed to have injured his calf in the second term. He was subbed out at half-time, which made the Swans have to bring on Tom Hanley. But getting to the game itself, it was a warm conditions up at the Gold Coast, and despite the Gold Coast getting the first goal of the game, it was all Sydney. It was all thanks to the Swans midfielders. They dominated at centre clearance, and the Swans looked dangerous heading inside 50. Sydney had a great start and saw them lead by 25 points at quarter time. However, the Suns came out to play in the second term. They scored the first 2 goals and dominated field position. But they failed to capitalise fully in the first half of the quarter, seeing the Gold Coast kick 2 goals for. And as we see most often, the opposition made them pay. Sydney kicked 3 goals in a row to take the margin to a game-high 29-point lead. But the Suns ended the first half in strong fashion with the last 2 goals to face a 17-point deficit at the main break. And with the end of that half, the Suns used that momentum to full effect in the third quarter. The Suns piled on 4 quick goals in the third term to take the lead from the Swans, and after kicking 6 goals to nothing in the third term, a 17-point halftime deficit was turned to a 24-point lead to the Suns at the final change. And in the final term, the Suns just continued on their merry way. They finished their goal tally at 12 in a row, and even though the Swans did kick a few goals late in the final term, it all meant nothing as the Suns ran out winners by a very comfortable 38 points. So Gold Coast, I mean, there's not really much to say. In my opinion, Sydney just fell off a cliff in that second half. They did well, the Suns, that they put them to the sword in that third quarter, kicked 42 points to 1. But I think this is all about Sydney's poor second half. I have not seen a more unspirited performance from Sydney in a half of footy in probably my lifetime, at least since I've been watching football. That was deplorable by the Swans. Granted, the conditions were quite warm on the Gold Coast, but this is round 7 of the season. These guys are AFL footballers, and they dropped off considerably. That was a very disappointing performance from Sydney, and Dean Cox, if he's going to make his mark on this team, he needs to make some big changes over the week. There are a couple of really poor performances today. Justin McInerney for one, Brodie Grundy unfit, and there are a couple of others as well. I don't want to see a couple of rookies being dropped just to try and ring in some changes. I know there's a few players out, but there's got to be someone in the reserves that wants to play for the jumper, because today was embarrassing. But moving to the statistics of this game on the multiple goal kickers, Ben King with the 5, Humphrey with 4, Walter with 3, and Rioli with 2 for Sydney. Blakey with 3 goals, Campbell and Chad Warnock with the 2. On the disposals for the Suns, Noble with 30, Miller 24, 22 to Anderson, 21 to Rioli, and 20 to Weller. And on Sydney, Sydney. Lloyd with the 29 along with McInerney. 28 to Roberts, 24 to Warner, and 20 to Rowbottom. And then for anyone out there looking on the AFL fantasy front, John Noble with the 109, Humphrey 99, 97 to Rioli, 87 to Witts, 80 to Anderson. And then for Sydney, Chad Warner with 119, Roberts 114, Lloyd 111, McInerney 99, and Rowbottom with a 91. But now moving to the votes in this game. 3 votes, Bailey Humphrey, 2 votes, Jared Witts, and the 1 vote to Ben King. Bailey Humphrey, one of the best career games I've seen from him. With Matt Rowell and Anderson probably not having their greatest performances today, he really stood up and hitting the scoreboard with 4 goals and 18 touches as a midfield forward. He was brilliant today. He was very good in the first half when they weren't at their best, and in the second half, he was one of the real players that put the Swans to the sword. So great job from him. Jared Witts led from the front in the middle of the ground. Like I said, Anderson and Rao weren't at their best, but he stood up, especially at clearance. And even though the Swans played 2 ruckmen, he looked like the fitter of the 3 players out there. And with Ben King, of course, finishing with the 5 goals, great performance from him, leads the Coleman race now. So next we get to the nation's capital, the Giants up against the Bulldogs, and despite the ladder positions, it was the Dogs who blitzed the Giants in the second half and went on to win by a comfortable 32 points. Bulldogs 113, Giants 81. Now getting to the game, it wasn't the most ideal conditions in the nation's capital with very greasy conditions. However, despite the Dogs scoring an earlier goal, it was GWS who were the better team early, winning the ball at contest and were able to keep the ball away from the prime movers of the Dogs. And after a tight opening term, it was the Giants who held a 5-point lead heading into quarter time. Now it was goal for goal to start the second term before the Dogs made their mini surge with 4 goals in a row to take a 12-point lead late in the first half. However, the Giants were able to take a slight lead late in the second term until Tim English was able to get a goal on the siren to see the Dogs take a 5-point lead into the major break. But even though it was a tight first half, the game completely went one way to start the third quarter. The Western Bulldogs dominated all over the ground and their defence was impenetrable. The Dogs not only kicked 5 goals in a row throughout the quarter, but were able to keep the Giants goalless, and heading into the final change, they led by 37 points. And the final term was pretty cruisy for the red, white and blue. The Giants did finish with the 4 of the last 5 goals, but the third quarter from the Dogs was all that was needed to bridge a big enough gap against GWS, and in the end, the Dogs ran out winners by 32 points. So first of all, on the Western Bulldogs, really impressive performance. Marcus Bontempelli back. He has been performing very well for them. Was subbed out just to rest him in the final quarter. What a great luxury that was. And their defence today was really inexperienced after dropping Liam Jones, and they did really well today. And the Giants, another very incredibly disappointing performance. They obviously didn't have Jesse Hogan last week against the Adelaide Crows, which was a little bit of an excuse. This week, they just went to him every single time they went forward. And all the Dogs had to do was triple team Jesse Hogan. Jake Stringer had no impact. Jake Riccardi went quiet after half-time, and the Giants have a few issues now. They go against the Swans next week, which now turns the Sydney Derby into a massive contest for both of those teams. So really big couple of weeks coming up for the Giants. The Dogs getting Marcus Bontempelli back, Treloar won't be too far away. Who knows where this team could be at season's end. But moving to the statistics of this game, on the multiple goal kickers for GWS, Jake Riccardi with the 3, Toby Green, Jesse Hogan and Bedford all with 2. For the Dogs, Harms with 4, West with 3, Lobb and Kennedy with the 2. On the disposals, Lockie Ash with the 31, Whitfield 30, Tom Green 27, Callahan 26 and Buckley with the 21. And for the Dogs, Liberatore 28, 27 to Richards and Fraser, 26 to Kennedy and 23 to English. And finally, on the AFL fantasy scoring, Whitfield with the 117, Ash 113, Riccardi 101, Buckley 100, Callahan 98. And on the Dogs, English 124, Kennedy 111, Liberatore 94, Richards 92 and Harms with the 90. But now getting to the votes in this one, 3 votes Tim English, 2 votes Matt Kennedy and the 1 vote to James Harms. Tim English, really liked his performance today, probably his best performance of the year. 23 touches, kicked the goal, but I really loved his performance in between the arcs, taking some nice intercept marks and taking some real clutch contested marks for the Dogs. This is when Tim English is at his best, when he's taking those relieving marks for the Dogs, and he was the best today. Matt Kennedy, what a season he is building at his new club at the Dogs. Carlton, definitely looking back at it now, probably would have wanted to keep him or try and sign him somehow, because what a performance he's been making for the Dogs this year. And James Harms with 4 goals in the first 3 quarters, went a little bit quieter in the final term, but 22 disposals and 4 goals from a forward mid, you take that every day. So now we get to Adelaide Oval, the afternoon game on Saturday evening. It was Port Adelaide against North Melbourne, and even though the Kangas stuck out this one till the end, it was Port Adelaide who held strong in the final quarter to win by 9 points. 97 to the Power, 88 to the Roos. Now there was one injury concern from this game, which was Josh Sin. Unfortunately received a heavy tackle in this game and went down for a HIA soon after it, with his head clashing into the turf, and after the 20 minutes of the check, he was subbed out of the game in the final 5 5 minutes of the second term. So really unfortunate. It will probably be looked at by the MRO with the Paul Curtis tackle. However, I think he should get away with it. I don't think he should be suspended for that tackle. I think it's just a little bit unlucky. Now, Port Adelaide's pressure was immense early against the Roos, who really struggled to even string 3 possessions together. However, they slowly worked their way into the quarter after conceding the first 2 goals of it to get themselves right back in the hunt midway through the term. And honestly, North Melbourne could have had the lead. However, with Port Adelaide finishing with the last 4 goals of the opening term, the Power would take a 29-point lead into quarter time. But the Kangas started well in the second term with the first 2 goals of it, and the game started to liven up. But midway through the second term, neither team could kick straight. But the Kangas finished with the 3 of the last 4 goals, and at halftime, the Power only held a 12-point lead. And heading into the second half, the game got a bit strange. In perfect conditions, both teams were dropping simple marks, missing kicks, and misfiring at goal. However, with Port Adelaide kicking 2 goals in a row, it seemed that they were about to run away with it. But to North Melbourne's credit, they were able to not only wrestle back control, but kicked 3 goals in a row to get themselves within a kick. But a costly 50-metre penalty given away from the Roos late saw Port Adelaide hold a 13-point lead heading into the final change. And what a final quarter we saw. Port Adelaide struck first, but the Roos kicked the next 2 goals to bring themselves to within 10 points. Every moment had a huge amount of pressure on it. However, the older, wiser heads of Port Adelaide stood up when they needed them most. North Melbourne fought gallantly, but in the end, the Power won by 9 points. So, a lot of people will say that this is only against North Melbourne, but this was a great performance from Port Adelaide. They were challenged all day and were able to hold up in the big moments in the final quarter. And even though they only won by just under 10 points, I still rate the Port Adelaide performance very much today. And they've won 3 in a row now, so hopefully they can get their season well and truly up and going. On North Melbourne, I don't mind their performance. It is very good that they responded from Carlton last week, but we have seen a lot of these sort of performances in the past from the Kangaroos, that they respond after a huge amount of backlash throughout the week, and I want to see it more consistently before I start to put some belief into the Roos going forward. But let's get into the statistics of this game. Of course, on the multiple goal kickers for Port Adelaide, Burne-Jones with the 3, 2 goals to Georgiades, Lord and Richards. For the Roos, Curtis with the 3 and Zerha with the 2. On the disposals, Rosie, Horn, Francis and Butters all with 27, Wines with 24 and Burgoyne with the 22. On the Kangas, Sheasel with 30, Parker 27, Davies-Uniacke 25, Sherry 23 and Daniel with the 22. And finally on the AFL fantasy front, Butters with a 126, Rosie 108, Georgiades 94, Sampao Pepper 93 and Wines with the 90. And for the Kangaroos, Cherry 122, Parker 97, Sheasel 95, 90 to Curtis and 84 to Wardlaw. But let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes Zach Butters, 2 votes Tristan Cherry and the 1 vote to Paul Curtis. Zach Butters truly led from the front today. Since he's been back, he has been one of the best players in the competition. He was brilliant, of course, with the 13 tackles in the middle, every single tackle. You could almost feel it through the TV screen. He was brutal today. But on the Kangas point of view, with Tristan Cherry, he won the ruck battle, I believe. 23 touches and a goal. I think he's been a little bit down this year on last year's great performance, but I think he was his best game of the year. And on Paul Curtis, being one of the best players of the North Melbourne Footy Club. Great start to 2025. 3 goals today, and is having a wonderful season for the Kangas. So to the first game on Saturday, it was St Kilda up against Brisbane. And with Brisbane needing to respond after a poor performance last week against Collingwood, they did that. They held the lead throughout the whole afternoon, and despite a little bit of a fight back from St Kilda in the third term, it was all Brisbane. Brisbane 118-73 to the Saints. Now, there were a couple of injury concerns from this one. Kyle Lohmann was the first one, received a heavy knock in the second term, which connected with his shoulder, but the injury seemed to be to his sternum. Now, he toughed it out until the latter parts of the third term, but eventually was subbed out. So Kyle Lohmann in his 3 games this year is yet to finish a full game. So a little bit unfortunate there for him, but he should be right in the next week or 2, hopefully. And Mason Wood received a head knock and was ruled out pretty soon after. And he's had a history of head knocks in his past, so St Kilda will take the cautious approach with him. But to the game itself, the first quarter was absolutely dominated by the Lions. They held the ball inside their forward half, their pressure was immense, but they couldn't put it on the scoreboard. In the first 20 minutes of the game, they kicked 1 goal 5. And it doesn't even tell the full story because they absolutely dominated. The Saints really were just holding on in hope. Now, the Saints were able to kick 2 goals, but it was all Brisbane who finally put some pressure on the scoreboard with 3 goals in the last 5 minutes of the term to lead by 18 points at quarter time. Now, despite the Saints getting a quick goal in the early stages of the second term, again, Brisbane looked good. They kicked 4 goals to 1 throughout the quarter, and even though it seemed like St Kilda were a little bit more competitive, they still lost the term and faced a 34-point deficit at the major break. But the Saints came out hot in the third quarter. St Kilda kicked 3 3 early goals to reduce the margin to just 17 points. And the Lions missed some crucial chances with 4 behinds in a row in the first 15 minutes of the quarter. However, Brisbane did straighten up, finishing with 4 of the last 5 goals throughout the later parts of the third term, and a 3-quarter time held a comfortable 38-point lead. And in the last term, it was a little bit elementary, with 5 goals to Brisbane and 4 to the Saints. Eventually, the Lions would see out a very comfortable win back on the winners list with a 45-point victory. So well done to Brisbane. They needed to respond after a poor performance against the Pies last week. They did really well. They looked a lot more cleaner. Probably their best performance of the year so far, a true 4-quarter performance. And on the St Kilda, I'm incredibly disappointed by their last few weeks. They've been getting killed in defence, conceding over 100 points in each game, which is something that they've been known to be better than that. And their forward line isn't able to kick goals. Other than Jack Higgins right now, there's not many shining lights up there in the forward half. Granted, they do have a few injuries, but simply not good enough from them over the past couple of weeks. Moving to the statistics of this game, though, Brisbane, multiple goal kickers had Eric Kippel with the 4 goals, Zach Bailey with 3, along with Lachie Neale and Logan Morris with the 2. For the Saints, lone multiple goal kicker was Jack Higgins. On the disposals for the Lions, Will Ashcroft with 35, Zorko 34, Neale 31, Wilmot 30, and Dunkley with a 24. On the Saints, Brad Hill 33, Wanganeen Miller with a 32, Sinclair and Steele with a 29, and McRae with a 26. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Lachie Neale top score with the 128, Zorko 124, Bailey 120, 113 to McCluggage and Dunkley. And for St Kilda, Wanganeen Miller with the 131, Brad Hill and Rowan Marshall with the 107, McRae and Sinclair with the 95. But getting to the votes in this one, 3 votes went to Lachie Neale, 2 votes went to Zach Bailey, and the 1 vote went to Eric Hipwood. Lachie Neale, what a performance from him today. Had 31 touches, but hit the scoreboard, something that he struggled to do over his career. But 3 goals throughout the game, did really well, led from the front. He needed to respond after last week, and as a true good leader does, he did. Zach Bailey, one of his best games that I've seen him play, 3 goals and 24 touches. Has always been a little bit wayward at times. He did kick 3 goals too today, so honestly could have been close to getting the 3 votes, but in the end, Lachie Neale was just a little bit better. And Eric Hipwood with the 4 goals. Over the last couple of weeks, since basically gather round in that second half against the Dogs, he's been in a really good form for Brisbane, and is starting to take that number 1 mantra that the Lions desperately needed him to do. So Friday night, we had Fremantle up against Adelaide, a huge contest between both sides. Fremantle coming off a poor performance the week before, and the Crows coming off one of their best games of the season. But the script was turned. The Dockers came out with fire in their bellies, dominated the early quarter and a half of this game, and won in the end by 18 points. Fremantle 85, the Crows 67. Now, there was one injury concern from this game, which is Riley Thilthorpe. He injured his finger in the third quarter, which he already had strapped at that stage. He did come off the field for a good 10 minutes. However, he did play out the rest of the game, but he was definitely hampered by this injury. So I just wanted to keep an eye on there for Crows fans going into the next couple of weeks. But it was a real contested start to this game. But it was Fremantle who started the better of the two sides with 6 goals in the opening term. Adelaide were able to get a few more on their side, but Fremantle definitely looked to have the early advantage at quarter time as they led by 25 points. Now, the Dockers kicked 2 early goals in the second term to put the margin over 6 goals. Now, Fremantle dominated the territory battle for the first quarter and a bit, but the Crows did start to win the contested battle and started to win a lot more of the territory. Now, the Crows were able to kick the last 3 goals of the first half to reduce the margin to just 20 points at the main break. Now, it was a real arm wrestle throughout the third term, but unfortunately for Adelaide, they just couldn't capitalise on the scoreboard. And Fremantle were lethal in front of goal. With 4 goals to 0 throughout the third term, the Dockers headed into the final quarter with a 42-point advantage. Now, for the first half of the final term, both teams were wayward. Fremantle did leave the door ajar with 0 goals 3 for the first half of it, but Adelaide didn't do themselves any favours with just 1 goal 3. And even though the Dockers weren't able to kick a major in the final term, they did enough in the first 3 quarters to win by 18 points. So well done to Fremantle. They needed to respond after last week against the Demons, and they did that really well in the first 3 quarters. Now, they didn't play it out, and that may be something they will be concerned about going into the next couple of weeks, but in the end, they put a team that has been really good so far this season to the sword, and they did really well in attack and in defence, which is something that's been questioned over the past couple of weeks. And the Crows, a little bit disappointing. I think if they want to be considered as a contender this year, then they have to win these games away, and the game was pretty much put away from them in the first quarter and a half. Now, they did fight with the Dockers in the second part of this game, but in the end, they just couldn't fight back enough, and it's something that is a little bit of a concern for Matthew Nicks going into the rest of the season. But moving to the statistics of this game, multiple goal kickers for Fremantle, Tracy, Frederick, Amos, and McDonald all with the 2 goals, and for the Crows, Thilthorpe with 3 and Walker with 2. On the disposals, Brayshaw with 37, Sarong 32, Johnson 27, Clark 26, and Ryan with 23. And for Adelaide, Laird 27, Dawson 21, Worrell 20, 19 to Nilbullen and Rankin. And finally, on the AFL fantasy front, Brayshaw 127, Ryan 94, Johnson 94 as well, Clark 93, and Tracy with the 76. And for Adelaide, Dawson 100, O'Brien 99 along with Rory Laird, 93 to Rankin, and Neil Bullen with the 85. But now we'll get to the votes in this game. 3 votes, Andy Brayshaw, 2 votes, Josh Tracy, and the 1 vote to Caleb Sarong. Andy Brayshaw, of course, won the game's medal. He was brilliant today with the 37 touches. He needed to lift after a poor performance as a leader last week, so he did really well. Josh Tracy, 2 goals, 3, would have been best on ground if he kicked straight, but he was really good in the air today as well with the 15 touches, and honestly, like I said, could have got 3 if he kicked straight, but did really well between the arc. And Caleb Sarong, even though it was a lot of handballs today, he was definitely one of the players that got those first touches and got it out for his runners in the game. So I think he really opened it up for Fremantle, so good job from him. After that, we get to the traditional Anzac Day clash, Collingwood against Essendon. And Pies seem to have this game won halfway through the second term, but to Essendon's credit, they were able to fight back in the middle part of this game, but the quality shone through in the end as Collingwood won by 41 points. 107 to the Pies, 66 to the Bombers. Now, there were a couple of injury concerns from this game. First of all, Daniel McStay had his knee buckle in the goal square in the second term, and he was subbed out pretty soon after. Now, some suspected it was an ACL, as he has had history with this sort of injury in his Collingwood career, but now it seems more of a medial ligament concern, which isn't ideal, but it is not the worst case scenario. And for Essendon, Harry Jones, in the latter parts of the third quarter, had an issue with his ankle, and he was subbed out at 3/4 time, and he was seen with ice on his ankle in the last quarter, so something to keep an eye on there for Bombers fans. But to the game itself, it was a dominant start from the Pies. They killed the Dons at clearance, and the Collingwood midfielders were just too good, led by the Dacos brothers. Now, the Pies kicked the 2 early goals to get things running, and even though Essendon did respond with their first pretty quickly after, it was all black and white for the opening term. The only thing that Collingwood didn't do was put it all on the scoreboard. With 3 goals for to quarter time, they led by only 15 points. However, after the Pies kicked the 2 early goals in the second term, it seemed at that point this is going to be an absolute thrashing. But credit to Essendon, as they were able to spark themselves into life. They kicked 4 goals in a row to get within 1 kick of the Collingwood Footy Club, but a late Magpie goal just before half-time saw Essendon face an 8-point deficit at the major break. And it was a great start for the Bombers in the second half with 2 quick goals to take the lead for the first time. This only just got the Pies up and going. They kicked 5 of the next 6 goals, and at 3/4 time, Collingwood regained their ascendancy from the opening term to hold a 24-point lead. And even though the Bombers did fight back early in the final term with 2 of the first 3 goals, it was Collingwood's day. They kicked away in the final 10 minutes, and in the end, ran out to win by a comfortable 41 points. So Collingwood were challenged today. You can't deny that. In the end, it was a real mature performance and a team that is going to be a contender at the end of the season. Being one of the older sides in the competition, a lot of people have said that that could concern them this year. I wasn't one of those people. However, I have said that it could hamper them in the future, which, I mean, right now doesn't really matter. Collingwood could very well be up there as a premiership contender at the end of the year, and they look good today. They had the fight in front of them in that third quarter, and when Essendon took the lead, and they stood up to that really well. So all credit goes to Collingwood. And to Essendon, one of the younger teams going into this week, and they stood up really well. I mean, it's a lot of credit to the Bombers after a poor start to their season. A lot of people were expecting to be in the bottom 4, but they've done well in the past month or so. So hopefully they can build on this going into the rest of their season. But moving to the statistics of this game, multiple goal kickers for the Pies. Jamie Elliott with the 5 goals, Membry with the 2. And for Essendon, Caddy, Wright and Durham all with 2. On the disposals, Josh Dacos with the 36, Sidebottom 35, Nick Dacos and Pendlebury with the 31, and Long with the 22. On Essendon, Roberts with 25 along with Zach Merritt, Hobbs with 20, 19 to Shield and Caddy. And finally, on the AFL fantasy point of view, Nick Dacos 120, Josh Dacos 119, Sidebottom 114, Elliott 110, and Cameron with the 103. And for the Dons, Zach Merritt 106, Durham 86, Goldstein 79, Roberts 78, and Caddy with the 77. But let's get to the votes in this game. 3 votes, still Sidebottom, 2 votes Jamie Elliott, and the 1 vote to Josh Dacos. Still Sidebottom. I don't know what he's been taking the last couple of months, but he has been really good so far this year. Honestly, in all-Australian form as a wingman. I think he's above 35 years of age. Don't quote me on that, but he has been insanely good so far this year for the Pies. He has been honestly one of their best players. If it wasn't for Nick Dacos, he'd be talked about maybe in Brownlow form. Just ran around the ground, was unopposed all afternoon. 35 touches, 4 tackles, and he set up a lot of scores today. So great job from Steele. Jamie Elliott with the 5 goals. Loved his performance today. Having a bit of an underrated season so far. Maybe he's an All-Australian form as well. I don't think he's ever got one. And both the Dacos brothers were fighting for this one vote, but gave it to Josh Dacos today. 36 touches, was great off that halfback roll, running through the middle of the ground and set up a lot of scores. So great job from Josh. And now we get to the Anzac Day Eve game between Melbourne and Richmond. It was a bit of a snooze fest, but Melbourne did what they had to do, breaking the Richmond Footy Club in the third quarter and running out winners by 20 points. 83 to Melbourne, 63 to the Tigers. Now, it was an undisciplined start from the Tigers, giving away 2 50-metre penalties in the opening 10 minutes of the contest. But early on in the game, it was quite open, with both teams able to remove the ball with relative ease. And despite the D's getting the first 3 goals of the game, Richmond were able to wrestle back a little bit of control at stoppage. And after 2 late goals, they found themselves only 5 points behind at quarter time. Now, the Tigers got themselves in front early in the second term, but it was a dour affair, to say the least. Both teams did struggle to score, and there was a reason why both these teams find themselves in the bottom 4. After 2 goals to either side at halftime, Melbourne held a 4-point lead. But the game did break open in the early parts of the third quarter, with the Demons taking full ascendancy. They kicked 3 quick goals to give themselves a 22-point advantage to break the Tigers. After 6 goals to 1 in the third term, Melbourne took a 35-point advantage into the final quarter. Now, fair play to Richmond. They were able to fight out the game and not get it blown out by too much. They ended up winning the final term, but in the end, the game was all done. The D's recorded their second win of the season by 20 points. So well done to the Demons. Of course, they were 0-5 a couple of weeks ago. A really good performance against Fremantle last week. And this week, they beat the Tigers, who, were coming off a good performance against the Gold Coast Suns, but a 5-day break was going to be tough for them. So hopefully they can use this Melbourne to catapult their season into maybe a close to the top 8 finish, or maybe around that middle part of the ladder. And Richmond, we're probably going to see a lot of roller coaster performances throughout the rest of the year. They may even record a couple more wins, but they did well in the first half of this game to stay close, but that third quarter truly broke them, and we can kind of expect that going into the rest of the year. But moving to the multiple goal kickers, Bailey Fritsch, Petty, Petrarca, and Chandler all with the 2 goals for the Ds. And for Richmond, Lynch with 3, Taranto with 2. On the disposal count, Salem 34, Bowie 32, Petrarca, Langdon, and Rivers all with 28. And for the Tigers, Dow 28, Short 25, Ross 24, Hopper 23, and Vlosten with the 22. And then for anyone out there looking at the AFL fantasy front, Salem 139, Gawn 138, Bowie 123, Petrarca 114, Viney 113. And for Richmond, Dow with the 99, and Curvis 94, Short 90, Lynch 83, and Hopper with the 81. But getting to the votes in this game, of course, 3 votes went to Max Gawn, 2 votes went to Christian Petrarca, and the 1 vote went to Christian Salem. Max Gawn the last couple of weeks has truly stood up. He's been one of their shining lights over the past 18 months, Max Gawn as the leader. He was brilliant today, especially in the first 3 quarters. 25 touches, 9 marks, 34 hit-outs, dominant clearance as you would expect. Max Gawn, one of the best leaders in the game. Christian Petrarca, really liking his role this year. He's still playing a little bit more midfield, but I like when he's going up forward as well. Hit the scoreboard with the 2 goals, 28 touches from him, so really good job. And Christian Salem, 34 touches over the game, 13 marks. Really liking his performance off of halfback, especially over the last couple of years, so good job from him. But guys, thanks for watching this episode of The Review. I hope you did enjoy it. And if you want to listen to the full episode, then make sure to go check us out on Spotify, as you can listen to the full episode there the morning after the round finishes. But that is all from me, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. But for now, we'll catch you all in the next one.